Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our session with the Aviation Department. You're joining the Francis Rose Center for Professional Growth, and we're happy to have with us today Travis French, the Aviation Practice Leader, and Christopher Tate, Aviation Broker, and Allison Strain, who is also an Aviation Broker. Welcome to this session. So what you do is very unique and interesting, and Arlington Road deals much in the property and casualty business, and aviation is a unique department at Arlington Road that not everyone understands. Not every agent knows that they have the ability to access you with aviation questions. So today we want to do a broad overview and discuss the aviation marketplace, and then also what your roles and responsibilities are at Arlington Row and how you can make it easy to do business with us when it comes to aviation. So today we'll start with Travis French, our aviation practice leader. And Travis, welcome. We would like to draw on your expertise this morning to discuss the marketplace. Where are we at right now with aviation and the insurance industry?
Well, if I had to sort of think of one word that would describe the marketplace right now, I would lean towards uncertainty. And just to give a sort of idea of where that comes from, the easiest place to start is probably to give just a quick snapshot of the last 20 years or so. In post 9/11, we saw a hardening of the market, somewhat as a reaction to the 9/11 attacks, but also just part of the normal cycle of things. And it was fairly short-lived. You saw rates increase from roughly 2002 until 2004. And at that point, you started to see new entrants into the market, quite a few. I think at the time we had 8 or 9 aviation markets in total, maybe 10. And I think at our peak in 2016, we were up to somewhere in the mid-30s in terms of number of markets that we were working with. So the soft market cycle started around that time, again, with capacity increasing, more players coming into the marketplace. And it lasted for a pretty good while. I would say it was strong all the way through 2017, started to wean away, phase out around 2018, and then by 2019, you had really seen the market make an effort to turn it around, get rates up, start the next hard market cycle. You know, the thought at the time was, rates are insufficient. The long and short of it, they were just paying out more in claims than they were taking in premiums. And it was around that time when you had the 2 large incidents involving the Boeing Air Max aircraft, and then not as large, but also a significant event around that time was the helicopter crash in California involving the Kobe Bryant charter flight. So you had all of these things happening at once. You had also had a few companies leave the marketplace, Swiss Re, Berkeley Aviation, a couple of the smaller players. So we had a small shrinking in capacity and then a large series of claim events. And so that sort of accelerated the process to where by 2020, the hard market was well underway. Percentage-wise, increases were quite large, many shocks to the policyholders. But with rates having gotten so low in the time period before that, of course, the percentage increases were going to be larger in those years. And to fast forward to today, we're still very much in that hard market cycle, although you do see some discrepancies here and there where things are maybe a little cheaper than they were a year ago, or maybe some more aggression on new business quotes in certain classes of business. But that's probably more the exception still at this point rather than the rule. Where we are today, I would say the biggest hot topic leading to my initial, comment that the uncertainty is the word of the day is what's going on in Russia with the seizure and nationalization of billions of dollars in, leased airline equipment. That equipment belongs to companies all over the world. There's a large portion of it centered in Ireland, in the United Arab Emirates, in the U.S. I've heard estimates as high as 12 billion, as low as 6, 7, 8 billion in the best case scenario. But it all points to the same direction, is that we are looking at what is likely going to be the largest loss in aviation history, general aviation or airline, just aviation period. Estimates are still being revised as far as what's ultimately going to be paid out, but this is going to impact things from the top down, really starting at the reinsurance level. That's where the largest impact will be. And of course, all of our markets, all of them are reinsured to one degree or another, but there's some large variance there. But what we're going to see is that reinsurance costs are going to rise sharply. It probably can't put a percentage on it at this point, but I'm hearing anywhere from 30 to 50 to even higher percentage wise, and that will directly impact the rates that we see them quote for for the risks that we work on. So it hasn't happened yet. The impact isn't here today, but it's coming. 1/1 of 2023 is, you'll likely start to see it present itself then, and then certainly by 4/1 of 23, I think we'll start to have a better idea of the impact. But there's a lot of caution right now in the marketplace, a lot of quote unquote defense playing, not necessarily looking to add new business to their books, and still in a lot of cases you see them scrubbing down their books, maybe dropping a few renewals willingly, letting go of business, that just as they try to sort of clean up what they have in house. So a lot of changes, and then the impact of COVID is still present. There were a lot of retirees. There are the pace of things has slowed down. Seems like there seems to be shortages in terms of personnel and really expertise. There were, I wouldn't say you had an older population in aviation, but you did have a lot of people who had been in it 20, 30, 40 years, who were maybe in their 60s and just decided to go ahead and retire. And that's happened a lot in the last 5 years. So bringing in the new crop of people, obviously with like any other transition, takes time, and we've definitely had to be patient and temper our expectations in terms of how quickly things can be turned around to us, and from the simplest matters up to the most complex questions everyone's just had to deal with, working in new time frames. So not a lot of positive news in terms of the buyer's perspective for aviation, but that's sort of what we've been faced with. That's one of the challenges the last few years is, as a broker, relaying the best information possible, even if it isn't always the best or friendliest news, and maintaining professionalism and just making sure we do our job on our end, that in these difficult times that we are still keeping the client's best interest in mind and doing the best job we can for them.
That's excellent, Travis. And you did a great job explaining the magnitude of this industry and how far reaching it is. So with those things in mind, again, managing expectations of what is now, how are we, obviously you have experts here. We've got people that work in this every day with Chris and Allison and yourself, but how are we situated at Arlington Row with our markets right now? If an agent brings us a risk, are we very well situated?
We are, and we've always made sure to maintain appointments with all of the available domestic markets so as to not leave gaps in that regard. We've had an aviation division since '91, and luckily we had a good leader in the beginning who sort of laid a great foundation for our position in the marketplace. There, we're not in the broadest pool being wholesalers. That was a fairly limited number of players in that space, and that's always worked to our advantage. And even more so in the last 5 years or so, you've seen a lot of those wholesalers either close shop altogether or at least close their aviation division. I mean, unfortunately, a few of the gentlemen who led the larger brokerages did pass away over that time. So, that space for us has actually gotten smaller, where we are today a more prominent player in the wholesale space than we ever were. I would say we are very well positioned with the majority of our markets, especially those at the top of our list, but in reality across the board, we've done a great job supporting all the players, keeping enough business on the books to maintain relevance. And I don't know if clout is the right word, but we can generally get our calls answered and our emails responded to, and we've always gone above and beyond to make sure that what we're submitting is as good as it can be, sort of taken on a pre-underwriting role, so to speak, because in what we do, we're similar to agents and we're similar to underwriters, but in more ways we're probably similar to underwriters. being able to identify peculiarities in things and risks that maybe don't look right, or being able to identify good risks on the other side. And so our companies have always appreciated that. We support long-term relationships. We generally don't take the approach of blanket the market every year all the time. And our companies year over year have voiced appreciation for that. And it's not born out of laziness, but really in support of, in this niche marketplace where we don't have hundreds of carriers jumping to offer terms, relationships are probably more important on average than in most cases. So we've always just sort of strived to support that MO.
And that's excellent, because illustrating those solid carrier relationships are so important in what we do, and you taking on the role as that underwriting, I'll call it liaison, to make sure that applications are complete and the carriers appreciate that they know when something comes to them, they can rely on Arlington Row. So thank you very much, Travis. We will transition over to Chris. And Chris, you are a broker. So what we'd like to do today is hear from you on your roles and responsibilities at Arlington Row. And then when a risk is brought to you, how do you explain and help out with your expertise and knowledge? Can you give us a broad overview, please?
So when a submission comes in, obviously we review the risk, and we review the application, make sure it is completed as thoroughly as possible. Any questions that we have, we try to make sure we've gone back to the agent and collect that information before we send it out to the underwriters, because specifically in this hard market that we're in, that Travis was describing, you really get one shot. If your application is lacking, if it's incorrect, if it's bad information, and there's not the information to clarify and explain maybe something that's not as desirable, you get one shot and they just want to get it off their desk. So we do sometimes go back multiple times when we're not getting the answers we need, but we try to get a thorough application before we send it out to the carriers. And
what would you say to an agent that brings you a risk that really doesn't understand where to start? Can you kind of pull back your thoughts to the basic level of how you introduce the needs and what you require?
Well, for example, we'll get emails from agents all the time, and they'll say, "Hey, I have a customer has an aircraft, or I have a customer that has a hangar that needs some premises liability, or maybe it's a maintenance facility and so forth." And so sometimes I'll just call them. Well, for example, I had a call the other day. Guy said, "Hey, I have a customer whose son's going to learn how to fly. He's going to join a flying club. Is he covered?" And so I just picked up the phone and called him and was like, "Let's dig in this a little bit deeper. He's joined the club. Yes. Okay. Are you looking for some additional coverage on top of that?" "Yes, that's what I'm looking for." "Okay, well, we have an individual non-owned policy that we can cover. As long as the individual doesn't have more than 25% ownership in the club, any equity, then this policy will respond, and I'll go ahead and forward it over to you, and here's the contact person to send it to," and so forth. So that's kind of just a small example of what we do. A lot of times people will call and say, "Hey, I've been doing this for 25 years. I've never had an aviation customer. Can you help me out?" I'm like, "Sure, absolutely. That's what we do." We probably, hold the hand of the agent more in this department probably than many others, because, they do P&C all day long. Sometimes we're like, "Well, can you help explain the coverages?" "Absolutely, we can do that." And the fun one is when they go, "Can you help me sound like I'm smart? I know what I'm talking about here." I'm like, "Sure, we can do that too." So that's kind of the that's what we get. We get a lot of those emails. We'll get emails forwarded from other departments and so forth. But as far as what hits my desk daily, it can be anything from someone owns a hangar and they need property coverage, or they're leasing a hangar and they need premises liability, or it might be, like I said, a maintenance facility that needs coverage, or a lessor's risk, someone that owns a hangar and he's leasing out the space to individuals. Sometimes they don't want hangar keepers coverage. Sometimes they do, and so we kind of flush that out so that we know which direction we're looking to send it to, and so forth. It could be a workers' comp submission, and a lot of times we get a workers' comp submission and there's a lot of lacking information. There's no class codes listed on there. They'll just describe it. They're missing the number of employees, federal ID numbers, officers, and specifically they don't answer all the yes/no questions. Those are things that our carriers are very finicky about, wanting to have all the answers before they're going to even consider the risk and so forth. So, I think one of the fun ones is when someone has a manufacturer that does 85-95% is all P&C exposure, but they do a limited amount of aviation, and they don't really want to stop writing the property and casualty products policy for them. So we can carve out that 10, 15, 25, 30. We can do 100% if it's all aviation products, and we can write a products policy with BI and PD and some grounding liability. And if, like I said, if it's just a small portion, they keep that policy knowing that it's probably got an aviation exclusion. We write the BIPD and grounding liability, and they're happy because they get to keep the premium on their side. We're happy because we write the other exposure, and the customer's happy because they're covered.
That's a wonderful illustration. So, Chris, we've talked about comparing an auto policy and how an agent goes about writing an auto policy to writing an aircraft policy. Can you make those comparisons for us today?
Sure. A lot of times when I'm speaking with an agent and they're talking about an aircraft policy, I'll explain to them and mention that an aircraft policy and auto policy are very similar to the way that they're structured and put together. So you have physical damage for the aircraft or the auto. And then you also have the liability that goes along for any damage caused by that aircraft or auto. But instead of having comp and collision, we have not in motion deductible or in motion deductible. So, and we can explain to them what those differences are, what in motion means. For example, in motion means when the aircraft is moving underneath its own power. So you could hook up an aircraft to a tug or pull it around an airport all day long. It's not in motion. Once it starts the engines or begins starting the engine, the aircraft is now in motion. So those are just some of the things that when I'm talking with an agent that I'll explain to them to help them kind of understand what it is they're selling to their client.
That's a very easy explanation. So an agent, oftentimes that's what they do all day. They write auto and they write home, and then giving them the ability to not shy away from accepting one of those risks and coming to us very, very much appreciated. Thank you, Chris. So from the magnitude of what aviation will cover, from the actual plane itself to the widget, right, the manufactured product, to GL, property, workers' compensation, you run the gamut in aviation. So Chris, what I'm really impressed with is the fact that you will assist an agent if they are in need of explanations with the client, that you will provide your expertise and actually make them look good in that discussion and the selling of that policy. Can you give me an example of something that had some heft to it that you've seen recently come across your desk without, giving away the agent?
Sure. So a couple of them, we had a customer with a large agency that the insured was buying an aircraft. They never owned an aircraft before. They didn't have any. They didn't have pilots yet. They're going to use a pilot services company, and the agent's like, well, can you get on the phone with the insured and talk to them, because I don't know anything about aviation. And like that's fine. We do that from time to time. So we got on the phone, explained everything, got the information that we needed, got it out to the market, and then when it came, sent the proposal to the agent and the insured, and then once again got on the phone and went over the coverages with the insured and the agent on the phone. So we do that. I mean, I do that from time to time. It's not my day-to-day thing, but I do it on a regular basis. We also had a company that was a catering company that I'm working on right now, and they had went to one brokerage and weren't able to get any terms. And so they sent it to us. And when I went, I knew that there was one company that would do it because they're the one that when you need help, they can help you with it, but it's a little more expensive. Went to them. Thankfully, it was past the 60 days, so they were able to give me the terms I needed. They already had the contract and everything, which was really interesting. And then we gave them the quote. The agent actually came back yesterday and asked for, can we reduce the deductible? So we reduced the deductible from $50,000 to $25,000. Didn't change the premium, and expecting a bind order here shortly.
Well, that's very interesting. And everything, soup to nuts, what you get questions on. But again, very much appreciate the fact that an agent might not even know where to begin, but they can come to us for the expertise. So with that, looking at the Midwest and having grown up here myself, we see every little community has a municipal airport. I grew up in a town of about 20,000 people, and it's busy. You're always going to find in some of those smaller communities those municipal airports. It may be pockets of wealth or industry where people are flying in and out. Do we see a lot of that coming from our agencies in the Midwest?
I would say that that's probably one of the larger things that types of risks I work on a daily basis. We write a lot of small municipal airports. We write some private airports. We write some large airports. The bulk of what we see are the small to mid, which with a liability of like $1 million to $10 million, which is really nice because we have I think all carriers can do the airport liability, but we have about 3 or 4 that are really good at it. And 3 of those 4 will offer either a 1 or a 3-year policy with a rate lock, which is nice. Get annual installments. And as long as there's no change in exposure, then the rates stay the same for 3 years, which is nice, especially in a hard market because they're continuously going up every year, and I don't see any foreseeable time where that's gonna stop at this point. So we can handle that. You see with the airports, they can be the small ones that they just lease, hangar space. We have some that don't have any hangars. We also have some that the airports also provide fueling, whether it's self-service or full service, and we can handle those exposures for those types of airports.
So let's talk a little bit about the uniqueness of some of the things we see as well. My marketing counterpart in Southern Illinois says that the crop dusting is just a big industry there. Can anyone elaborate on that?
Sure. I mean, we write some. It's not the largest portion of what we do, but we write a number of ag exposures. Whether it's the aircraft itself, which includes the aircraft, the chemical liability, some premises liability, all on the aircraft policy. We can also we write the workers' comp for them. I have one that does both fixed wing and helicopters as well. We write the workers' comp for that, which that one is becoming kind of interesting because we're really down to one market that will handle that exposure. But we can also do their buildings. If they have buildings on an airport, we can write the buildings. We can write the commercial auto. But we do have the carriers and the capability to handle the exposures for an ag account.
So Chris, thank you so much for mentioning the ag exposure, and we'll pivot over to Allison. Allison, I know you have a little bit of a different role here at Arlington Row, but can you expand upon that discussion on personal aircraft?
I handle all kinds of pleasure and business risks, usually owner flown, anything from students to experienced pilots that just have their own, usually piston aircraft. And I also handle personal non-owned risks and drone exposures.
So with this crop dusting in Southern Illinois we talked about, how does that relate? Do you get some questions about that in your area?
Yes, usually with drones. So drones have started coming into play in that industry more, I think. So we see more of that coming through, and we are able to write ag exposure with drones. So that definitely is something that comes up, I feel like, more and more.
What is the application process like that for an agent?
It's pretty similar to just our regular drone application, but there's definitely, with the chemicals and the spraying aspects, we have to go a little bit deeper with those applications.
So would you say if an agent gets that type of risk, they get a call or somebody walks through their door with it, just give you a call and you can guide them through that?
Absolutely. Yeah. And, we have all the applications, and we, even just sending in the applications, we go into detail about what we need and questions that may trip them up because they're just not used to seeing those types of exposures or questions on an application.
Thank you, Allison. So what are some of the areas that you are having success in right now? If you could explain to us what comes across your desk from the agency perspective, the type of risk that you're seeing.
I kind of see the whole spectrum from small little 4-place Cessna 172s to Cirrus aircraft, $600,000 Cessna 206s with student pilots. I just had that come through, which are more challenging to place. You end up with only 3, maybe 4 markets that'll even kind of consider student pilots once you get into more expensive aircraft. But I feel like I've been seeing a lot of that recently. People wanting to jump in with pretty pricey aircraft. And we've had some success in placing it. We're limited on markets, but we have a good relationship with those that do write that kind of business, and they'll usually work with us. And I've definitely placed several of those types of policies recently.
So Allison, let's talk about, again, some unique exposures that we may see at Arlington Row. You handle the pleasure aircraft. Do we see any seaplanes?
We do, a lot in Alaska. It's a very common mode of transportation up there. So you see a lot of seaplanes come up in Alaska, but all over the country. And we've got great markets for seaplanes. We write a number of those accounts already. And beyond that, experimental seaplanes and just experimental aircraft in general. We write anything from the builder's risk when you're just putting it together in your hangar or your garage, all the way up to once it's ready to fly. And it's interesting exposure. It's all that specialty side of the business, that you don't see as commonly and can really throw people for a loop. Anything from, you've got antique aircraft, like Stearman trainers, you've got Warbirds, your T6, your Conair, any of these things that come up that are interesting, kind of fun when they do, very unique, yeah.
Thank you very much, Allison. We appreciate your expertise and sharing your knowledge today. We'd like to end with Travis French giving us an overview of where he perceives the future of the aviation market is going, and again, what some of our expectations should be. Travis, you want to wrap us up today?
Sure. I guess I would bring it back to uncertainty because at this stage there's still a lot of unknowns. What's going to happen at the top reinsurance level, it will impact markets differently. Based on just their varying levels of reinsurance. We've had some tell us that they have little to no exposure to what's going on, and others, well, without them telling us, we don't need them to tell us, they're heavily exposed to what changes are coming down the pipeline. So it will probably be around halfway through 2023 before we start to see things materialize and get a clearer picture of what rates and appetites and those sorts of things are going to look like going forward. So it at this stage, still a lot of unknowns. That probably have to edit here. I'm trying to think of where you would go from here. If I had to take a guess, we're probably going to continue to see rates increase generally across the board, while the markets sort of seek to find a sustainable rating program that hopefully doesn't lead us into another extreme soft market and then rebound cycle like we saw with the last one, 4 or 5 years ago. But I mean, certainly still high on their agenda is going to be, rates that can be acceptable, to the customers, that they're not going to run off the commercial operators or, start a trend where you see it impact aircraft sales or anything like that, but where they can also remain profitable. So, and that's still TBD. That sweet spot that they're looking for hasn't been found yet. But the one thing that is certain is that the rates aren't there yet. So there's no question that we'll continue to see premiums increase. Where the ceiling is, though, I guess that's one of the bigger things that we hope will come into focus. Personally, I think we're still going to lose a couple markets in the space, which is part of the natural cycle of things. So that's not a surprise. It's really just a matter of waiting to see who it will be, and then what sector of our efforts and what we do that will be impacted most. I've heard rumors of at least one new entrant looking to get into the space, which is somewhat surprising, but not entirely a shock, because if there was a time to get in, maybe that on the rebound is not a bad not a bad time frame to try and do it. So personally, I'm not really keen on getting more capacity into the market. We still have ample carriers for 99% plus of what we do. We still seldom ever have to say no, despite being in a hard market cycle. From 2004 to 2018, we never said the word no. If you had the money, we had the time, and a lot of times you didn't even need that much money. So yeah, I mean, it will be different, and our workflows will continue to be different, and we'll still have to sort of take on the role of liaison in terms of letting the agents know what to expect, and giving them facts and data that they can back up, and share with their clients to sort of back up their proposals and reasonings for why things are behaving the way they are. So that's it in a nutshell.
Thank you very much, Travis, for keeping things in perspective with us and explaining that we still have access to markets and managing during this hard market and complicated times. I think in the insurance industry, that's the most important thing in a hard market, that we still can find the coverage. We know the premiums are going to be there, right? But if we can find the coverage and provide that to the agent to sell to the insured or the client, that is the crux of what we do at Arlington Row. And I really like the fact that you said you very seldom had to say no, because we have a corny phrase at Arlington Row: don't say no, call Arlington Row. But we really mean that. And that's the important message out to our agents. Do not hesitate to pick up the phone and call. We appreciate the expertise today, the sharing of your knowledge, and your willingness to talk to agents and work through a risk and find the right solutions for them. So thank you again today. It's been a pleasure, and this concludes our session of the Francis Rose Center for Professional Growth.